I always want you to know that I got where I am today because other people took the time to help me, to support me, to lift me up, to do all those magical things that you need when you're small and starting. Welcome to Jenna Frog's Bookkeeping Lily Pad, your cozy corner of the podcasting world, where numbers tell a story and bookkeeping blossoms into an adventure. My name is Rachel Barnett, and I'm glad you're here. This podcast is for bookkeepers who enjoy authentic, unfiltered, and always encouraging friend to talk shop with. We will be discussing what it's like to own and operate a small bookkeeping business. Okay, so it's going to be two bookkeepers discussing best practices and brainstorming ideas. It's myself, as well as Elizabeth Sims with Bookkeeping Handmaid. Elizabeth and I are both professional bookkeepers. We decided that we were going to get together and kind of just brainstorm how to deal with some common issues, questions, whatever. And we thought it'd be fun if we just recorded our calls because you never know if this information can help another bookkeeper. I certainly hope it helps you. If either one of us can be of service to you, please don't hesitate to reach out. So, Elizabeth, could you briefly describe who you are and maybe what software you like using?
I'm Elizabeth. I'm the Bookkeeping Handmaid. I serve cleaning businesses and event planners. And I use FreshBooks as my accounting software.
I think that's awesome. I've worked with cleaning businesses and that feels solidly okay. I've worked with the event planners and I'm like, maybe that's not my jam. So if you like event planners, I'm thrilled to know that you exist and that this is a thing you'll enjoy. Yeah, like no joke. I find it to be challenging to keep track of the deposits in kind of their nice big hearts, but disorganized way of organizing things. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if I have the patience.
Yeah, definitely. And so we definitely keep continuing to grow and is the patience for whoever we serve, but we're here.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have business website or anything?
I do. I have a website. It is www.bkhandmaid.com.
Awesome. Can you tell me a little more about like what you need or how I can help?
So I do have a few questions. So the first one, how can I explain to a client that I'm an independent contractor and not an employee?
Okay, so if a client says like, hey, I want you to fill out a W-4 or I want you to work a specific shift, I would let the business owner or the potential client know, hey, I'm actually a business. Like, were you looking to hire an employee? Because hiring me is a lot like hiring your graphic designer or your attorney, or in your personal life, it's like going to the doctor or the dentist. Like, they're available when you need them. You agree on some stuff that'll get done, but like you don't really get to dictate their schedule. Yeah. So some version of that, like depending on how friendly the person seems is whether or not I pull the examples from personal. I try to pull examples of other people that they're likely to work with, such as the designer or attorney or whatever, just to be like, well, you would never expect these people to give you a schedule in like you're working from 9 to 3 on Monday and Tuesday. Like, no, not happening.
Yeah, those are really good points. Great points. I don't think I even thought about those. Great. Okay. Well, thanks. So another question that I have is, how can a bookkeeper explain to a client what documents the client will receive from the bookkeeper before services begin? And I'm specifically talking about things such as the W-9 and not things like a proposal, stuff like that.
Oh, I usually don't explain it and I don't send a W-9, which I suppose I could. I just wait for them to ask if they even ask. When people pay me, they pay through a third-party processor. Nobody's ACHing directly to my bank, which means that they're not going to send me a 1099. I'll get a 1099K from the third-party processor. So it just doesn't come up during the initial phone call.
Okay. I think I understand what you're saying. Okay, because I've heard other bookkeepers share things such as W-9 is needed for taxes, like it's mandatory. So it's not mandatory.
It is mandatory. There's a flow chart. And at the beginning of the flow chart, it says, did you pay anybody with cash or cash equivalent, like cash out of your bank or check out of your bank? Did you pay a person directly? And that's where it breaks because people who pay me, they pay through an Intuit invoice or through Anchor or through Stripe. Nobody's mailing me a check. So if they were mailing checks to me, then of course it's totally mandatory. And I'll give it to anybody who asks for it. Like, I don't care, but I'm like, it just doesn't come up.
Yeah, got it. That makes sense. Okay. So I think I've seen on the W-9 form that I could either someone can put their EIN number or their social. What's your view on giving out socials?
I accidentally forget to put my social and I always put my EIN.
Okay.
Yeah. I feel like there's enough companies out there sharing my social, like with the dark web. I don't need to contribute to it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And my last question is, can you explain the process of which the 1099 miscellaneous form would come in?
Yeah. So the 1099 miscellaneous most often is going to be a form you issue for rent. It's not the NEC form where the NEC non-employee compensation is what you're issuing to your contractors if they're not paid with a credit card or third-party app, and if they're not incorporated. The NEC, I issue it for rent, like office rent. And that's assuming that the landlord isn't getting paid through a third party and the landlord's not incorporated.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah, for sure. This is awesome. Thank you. During this call, Elizabeth and I talked about some questions she's had as a new bookkeeper. The call had two primary topics. How do you address it when somebody contacts you and they think they're hiring an employee, but you're really an independent contractor? And the second question pertained a lot to W-9 and 1099s. I wanted to expand a little bit on both. I thought maybe it would help if I started with some signs that the person you're talking to might misunderstand and might think that you're an employee and not a contractor. The first one that comes to mind is the person you're speaking with might ask you for your resume. This is always a little bit uncomfortable for me because I don't have a resume. I'm not going to give out a resume. If somebody wants to know my experience, I'm happy to send them my LinkedIn profile. This doesn't come up for me now like it used to, but it's definitely come up in the past when my online presence wasn't as strong as it is now. If you find somebody asking for your resume, you might turn it around and ask them, what is it that they're concerned about? Or what are they looking for? Let them know that you have a business. Your business has a website. Your business has online reviews, has testimonials from other clients, but it doesn't have a resume. So my next example could be a sign that they think of the person they're hiring as an employee, or it could just be a sign that they like the idea of having the person nearby. But what I wrote down for this was they want you to work on site. I've definitely had situations where it was easier and I had to go work on site. The client had an inbox and a ton of scraps of paper and just really chose not to scan these documents over to me. It was easier for me to go to their office, to go pick up stuff in the bookkeeping inbox, to do the bookkeeping, to walk around the office and talk to the different people in the office to get my questions answered and then to leave. It wasn't that they thought that I was an employee and they didn't treat me like an employee, but other times there are definitely cases where they might say, oh, I need you to come in and work on site. I need you to have a particular schedule. Here's your desk. Here's your email address. Some things that start to feel a little bit more like you're an employee and less like you're a small business owner. Other signs that somebody might be treating you like an employee, and this really isn't a reflection on them. It could just be lack of experience on their part. But it's when they ask you to start using their tools, technology, and software. This is kind of a funny one because sometimes clients will have software they like to use. For example, maybe they're a restaurant and they're using Toast, or maybe they have an e-commerce business and they're using Shopify. There are going to be cases when you're working with someone and they have software in place that they're using and you need to use that software to be able to help them. That's fantastic. There have been times when I've started working with a client and the next thing you know, I've got a company email account. Now, I'm not talking accounting at company name. I'm talking Rachel at company name. That's not an email address that's going to transfer to the next bookkeeper. I had one client who I really, really enjoyed. I don't even know how this happened, but one thing led to another and suddenly I'm in their Basecamp software. I'm seeing all the internal workings of their business and I'm getting tagged on things and I'm very much a part of the team, which is lovely and I appreciate, but it's not really the role of an independent outside external bookkeeper. Next up on my list is software. Software is kind of a funny thing because there is definitely value in the client saying, I would really prefer to use accounting software A instead of accounting software B. All in, full stop, I'm 100% on board. There's going to be other times, however, when the client might ask you to use software that you don't need to use or want to use. An example of this could be maybe they want you to log stuff in their project management software. Maybe they want you to communicate with them and their team and just get a sense of everything that's happening within the business. So they've added you to Basecamp or ClickUp or Slack or whatever the case is. There's some level of like, okay, here's an easy way for us to communicate. But there's also a level of them taking control and saying, oh, this is how you're going to communicate with us, rather than you, the business owner, saying, actually, this is how I communicate with my clients. So while your entire company is in this other place, that's super great, but I don't need to be there. I don't need to interact with your entire company. I'm not really a part of the team, which is not to sound unkind, but it's more like stuff like you don't need to participate in meetings with the team. Unless the meeting has something to do with finance, you don't need to be part of the Monday morning stand-up, for example. When working with a client, if there's any indication that they're going to want to give you a performance review or that you have to ask for a raise, those are going to be signs that things are not quite right. Those are signs that even though you're a contractor, the person you're working with might consider you or treat you like an employee. The other topic that Elizabeth and I talked about briefly was 1099s and W-9s. If you're not already familiar, the W-9 is the form collected from one business to another to identify if the business who has hired the other business needs to give the other business an IRS Form 1099. The IRS Form 1099 is actually a pile of different forms. They just happen to start with the numbers 1099. The W-9 form tells the business that has issued the money to the individual or the company receiving the money what kind of business the recipient has. Specifically, what kind of entity. Is that business entity a sole proprietor? Is it a partnership? Is it a corporation? You get the idea. After knowing what type of entity the receiving business has, the business paying the money will be able to use this information in conjunction with other information to decide if they need to submit a 1099 form to the company receiving the money as well as the IRS. As bookkeepers, the two most common types of 1099 forms we see are the 1099 miscellaneous and the 1099 NEC. I'm really not going to go into detail on either of these forms, especially not on this podcast. If you're not sure what the forms are, go to irs.gov and just search 1099. If you're curious about the 1099 miscellaneous or NEC and how the entity type makes a difference, the flowchart is not a flowchart on the IRS website. It's way too complicated for that. But ultimately, there's a bunch of if this, then that scenarios. I strongly encourage you to go through the instructions every single year, even if you're totally and completely confident that you understand them. The instructions for January 2024 are 12 pages. The PDF font appears to be maybe an 8-point font, maybe a 10-point font. It's pretty small. I encourage you to go through the IRS instructions for these forms. I encourage you to do it every single year. I encourage you to watch webinars where other people have gone through the forms. I think that the instructions are both clear and complicated. I think especially for a new bookkeeper, there's a lot to know and a lot to understand. And oftentimes the best way that we learn and understand things is to watch people explain it, different people explaining it different ways, and then going back and reading the instructions and see if you interpret things in the same way that somebody else did. This podcast episode is going to be the first in a series of podcast episodes that I'll just weave in with other ones where I have coaching calls with people. Some people want to have their audio included in the podcast and other people don't. I'm more than happy to respect the wishes of anybody with whatever their preference is. There are so many places and so many ways for small bookkeepers and small business owners to sign up for a course or sign up for a program or sign up for something where they can get advice on how to run their small business. I think that's fantastic. I'm glad these places exist. The downside, however, is much like anything else, you don't really know what you're getting, and you don't know if what you're getting is coming from somebody with experience or somebody who took a program and 6 months later decided to start their own program. My goal with this podcast is just to provide a free alternative. The episodes are pretty short. The ideas are things that come to me, often from conversations with other people. My goal is to provide information and to help people out however I can. I always want you to know that I got where I am today because other people took the time to pull me into their circle, to help me, to support me, to lift me up, to do all those magical things that you need when you're small and starting. And frankly, those magical things that I still need to this day. So this podcast is just me paying it forward. The theme of it has been and will continue to be me sharing any ideas I can, little tiny pep talks, pieces of advice, different ways to think of things. I am by no means an expert on any of this. I'm just trying to share ideas and wisdom and a few laughs. Because you're listening to this, you have a very good sense of what my podcast is like. If you ever want to be a guest on my podcast, if you ever want to brainstorm something with me, if you want to be the person providing coaching, if you want to be the person asking things and getting my 2 cents on something, I would love it. You are more than welcome to join me on the podcast. And again, the whole goal is to do what we can to share information, to provide insight, to lift other people up, and to be an alternative to paid programs that people sometimes can't afford or choose not to pay for. There are lots of things out there we have to pay for. This is one thing I can do as a courtesy, and I'm happy to do it. Thanks.